They dragged her into the station, the cuffs biting into her wrists as the room filled with whispers and suspicion. To the officers around her, she was nothing more than a fraud, someone pretending to be a Navy SEAL, claiming honors she had no right to wear. The paperwork was stacked against her, the charges already typed, and the glares from the people in the room told her that no one believed a word she said. But behind her steady eyes and calm silence, there was something deeper, something none of them could quite place. At first, the interrogation was routine. They pressed her for answers, demanded details about missions, units, and training they were certain she couldn't know. Yet every time, she answered with precision, with a quiet confidence that unsettled even the most experienced officers. It was almost as if she wasn't defending herself, but waiting for something, someone. And then, the door creaked open. A tall figure stepped inside, his metals glinting under the harsh lights. The room straightened instantly. A general. The general didn't speak right away. He studied her, his expression unreadable, his eyes locked on hers like he was searching for something long buried. The officers expected him to confirm their suspicions, to laugh at her claims, to seal her fate with a single command. Instead, he walked closer, leaned down, and whispered words that froze every soul in the room. "That mark's real." The tension broke like glass. Gasps rippled through the room, papers fell to the floor, and the certainty in the officers' eyes shattered. Suddenly, the fraud they thought they had caught wasn't so simple. Suddenly, the possibility of her truth hung heavy in the air. But what did the general mean? What was that mark only he seemed to recognize? And why did his voice carry both fear and respect when he said it? This was no ordinary arrest, and she was no ordinary suspect. The story you're about to hear will unravel layers of secrets, loyalty, and hidden history. Because when the highest authority in the room acknowledges a mark that no one else dares to speak of, everything changes. Stay with me, because what happens next will leave you questioning everything they thought they knew about her, and everything she's been hiding all along. The room was heavy with silence after the general spoke, every eye darting between him and the woman still in handcuffs. No one dared to question his words, but confusion painted every face. The young officers had no idea what the mark meant or why it had shifted the general's entire tone in an instant. They only knew one thing. The person they thought was an imposter suddenly carried an air of danger and authority they couldn't explain. The woman didn't flinch. She simply lowered her gaze, almost as if she expected this moment. The quiet confidence she carried wasn't arrogance. It was the kind of steadiness forged in places most people could never imagine. But no one in that room knew her story. To them, she was still a mystery, a stranger claiming a role that few in the world could ever truly understand. The general straightened his back, his voice firm now as he told the officers to step outside. They hesitated, unsure if they should really leave him alone with her, but his tone made it clear there was no room for debate. Reluctantly, they obeyed, shutting the door behind them. The click of the lock echoed, and suddenly, it was just the two of them. He moved slowly to the table and sat across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You know what they're saying about you?" he asked, his voice low but sharp. She gave a faint nod. Of course she knew. They thought she was lying, wearing titles she hadn't earned. But what none of them realized was that her silence wasn't because she was guilty. It was because her truth couldn't be spoken so easily. The general leaned back in his chair, the weight of memory flickering across his face. He had seen the mark before, but only a handful of times in his long career. It wasn't a badge anyone could buy, or a medal that could be pinned to a uniform. It was something earned in the shadows, recognized only by those who had lived through it. And for her to bear it meant that she carried secrets most of the world was never meant to know. Outside the door, the officers whispered among themselves, debating who she really was and why the general seemed to know her. None of them realized they were standing at the edge of a story far bigger than a simple arrest. And as the seconds ticked by inside that room, the mystery only grew stronger. What was her connection to the mark? Why did the general seem both unsettled and protective of her presence? The answers were there, but only she and the general knew them. For now, the general's eyes stayed fixed on her, searching for something beyond words. "You know what this means," he finally said, his voice low, almost reluctant. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The tension in the room made it clear that the mark on her was no accident. It wasn't a tattoo for vanity, nor a symbol for show. It was a sign of belonging, one tied to operations buried so deep they were erased from official records. And that was the very reason her arrest was so dangerous. Meanwhile, outside the closed door, the younger officers wrestled with doubt. Officer Ramirez tapped his pen against his notebook, replaying the interrogation in his mind. Every detail she gave about SEAL missions had been exact. Dates, codes, even the small rituals only insiders would know. It didn't fit the picture of a pretender. "What if she's telling the truth?" he whispered. His partner, Officer Lane, scoffed, but the question lingered. If she was real, then everything about their arrest was a mistake, and worse, it meant they had stepped into something far bigger than their pay grade. Inside, the general pressed further. "If you carry that mark, then you were chosen. But why surface now? Why risk exposure?" His voice held suspicion, but also a trace of fear. She finally looked up, her gaze steady. "Because the world isn't safe anymore," she said softly. It was the first time she had spoken since the arrest, and her words carried a weight that even the general couldn't dismiss. Her answer opened more questions than it solved. Was she warning him of something? Was she running from an enemy? Or was she hiding from her own past? The conflict wasn't just about whether she was a fraud. It was about the secrets she carried, the ones that could unravel everything if revealed. At that same moment, whispers began to spread through the precinct. News of her arrest had already leaked to the wrong ears. A man in a dark suit lingered outside the building, phone pressed to his ear, reporting every detail. Whoever she wasn't just important to the general, she was important to others too, people who didn't want the truth exposed. The tension only thickened. She wasn't just a suspect anymore. She was the center of a storm, caught between loyalty, secrecy, and forces determined to silence her. And the worst part was, no one yet knew which side she was truly on. The general's jaw tightened as he absorbed her words. The world isn't safe anymore. They echoed in his mind like a warning bell he couldn't silence. For years he had buried operations, names, and marks that were never supposed to see daylight again. Yet here she was, sitting across from him, proof that the past wasn't as buried as he had believed. His silence only made the moment heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. She leaned forward slightly, the cuffs rattling against the table. "You know what they'll do if they find out I'm here," she said, her voice calm, but edged with urgency. The general didn't respond right away, but he knew she was right. Forces outside these walls were already circling, and once they discovered her presence, the station would no longer be a safe place. Out in the hall, the whispers between officers grew louder. Rumors spread like wildfire, some saying she was a covert agent, others insisting she was part of a shadow unit erased from official records. Ramirez couldn't shake the feeling that they had underestimated her, and when he noticed a black SUV idling outside the precinct, his stomach turned. It wasn't just curiosity keeping outsiders interested. Someone had come for her. Back in the room, the general finally spoke, his tone firm. "If what you're saying is true, then you've put every person in this building in danger." She met his stare without flinching. "I didn't bring the danger here. It's already been following me." Her words carried the weight of someone who had been running for too long, carrying secrets too heavy to keep hidden. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder, each second dragging tension tighter. Outside, Lane caught sight of the man in the dark suit moving closer to the doors, phone still in hand. It wasn't just an observer anymore. It felt like the beginning of something coordinated. Lane hurried back to the others, his voice low but strained. "We've got company, and I don't think they're here to talk." Inside, the general's eyes narrowed. He could feel it too, the shift in the air, the storm pressing against the walls of the station. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure who was friend or foe, and with her sitting in front of him, holding the mark that changed everything, the line between truth and danger blurred to nothing. The moment of collision was coming fast, and none of them were ready for what would break through that door. The tension in the station snapped when the front doors slammed open. Two men in plain black suits entered, their expressions sharp and unreadable. They moved with a precision that immediately set them apart from the usual visitors. The officers near the lobby stiffened, unsure whether to stop them or stand aside. Their badges were flashed too quickly to verify, but the authority in their voices left little room for hesitation. "We're here for the prisoner," one of them announced, his tone clipped, leaving no space for questions. Ramirez felt the hairs on his neck rise. Something about the men didn't fit. Their presence wasn't routine. This was an operation, controlled and timed. He caught Lane's eye, and both of them knew the same thing. The general hadn't summoned these men. Someone else had. Inside the interrogation room, the general's phone buzzed. He glanced at the message, and for the first time, his mask cracked. The text was short, urgent, and undeniable. "They know she's with you. Extraction in progress. Trust no one." He looked back at her, his voice low. "They're here already, aren't they?" She gave a faint nod, her expression unreadable, but her eyes carried the answer he dreaded. Before the general could respond, the door to the room burst open. One of the black-suited men stepped inside, his gaze fixed on her. He ignored the general entirely, as though rank meant nothing in this moment. "She's coming with us," he said flatly. The general rose to his feet, his presence filling the space. "Over my authority?" His words cut sharp, but the silence that followed only deepened the unease. She looked between them, her mind racing. The mark she carried wasn't just a symbol of survival. It was a key, one that could unlock truths powerful enough to reshape alliances. If these men had come for her, it meant they weren't just after a suspect. They were after what she represented. Ramirez and Lane watched through the glass, unable to hear the exchange but sensing the rising storm. Lane whispered, "We shouldn't let them take her." Ramirez didn't answer. He wasn't sure what side he was even on anymore. The general stood his ground, but he knew the truth. This was no longer about an arrest. This was about control, and whoever commanded those men wasn't interested in justice. They were interested in silencing her before the truth ever left this room. The room seemed to shrink as the man in the black suit stood his ground, demanding she be released into his custody. The general didn't move, his voice steady but sharp. "You don't outrank me here. She stays." The air grew heavy, a silent standoff hanging between them. For a moment, it felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Then she spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "We're not here for me. You're here for what I know." The man's jaw tightened, confirming her words without admitting them. The general turned toward her, finally realizing the scale of what she carried. It wasn't just her mark or her identity. It was knowledge, information buried so deep it could shatter powerful institutions if revealed. The suit reached for her arm, but in one smooth motion, she stood and pulled free, the cuffs clattering to the ground. Everyone froze. The general hadn't removed them, yet they were unlocked. She had been in control all along, waiting for the moment to act. Ramirez and Lane burst into the room, guns raised, but she lifted her hand. "Don't," she warned softly. "You'll never know who you're really aiming at." The general's mind raced. He could either let these men take her, burying the truth forever, or side with her and risk unleashing secrets that could destabilize everything he had spent his career protecting. Before he could decide, she leaned close to him, her whisper sharp enough to cut. "You know who sent them. It wasn't the enemy. It was your own." The words hit harder than any weapon. The general's eyes flickered with shock. The threat wasn't foreign. It was internal. The very people sworn to protect the country were the ones trying to erase her existence. In that instant, the choice became clear. He stepped forward, blocking the suits with a commanding presence that brooked no argument. "She's not leaving with you." The room erupted. Shouts, movement, the sudden chaos of a power struggle. And then, just as quickly, silence returned. The suits retreated, not defeated but warning with their eyes that this wasn't over. As the doors slammed shut, she turned to the general, her expression unreadable. "You chose the right side, but now you're in it with me." For the first time, the general realized the truth. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was only the beginning, and the mark on her wasn't just real. It was a call to war. The air in the station was thick with the weight of what had just happened. The black-suited men were gone, but their presence still lingered like a shadow across every wall. Ramirez and Lane stood frozen, unsure if they had just witnessed the end of a cover-up or the beginning of something far more dangerous. For them, This was supposed to be a simple arrest. Now, it had become a moment that would change how they viewed authority forever. She sat back down, calmer than anyone else in the room, her hands resting lightly on the table. The mark on her wasn't just proof of her past. It was proof of a hidden world, one where loyalty and betrayal walked side by side. The general lowered himself into the chair opposite her, the weight of his choice heavy on his shoulders. He knew what it meant to side with her. He had turned against powers far greater than himself, and there was no going back. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" he finally asked. Her eyes softened for the first time, and there was almost a hint of sadness in her voice. "Because words don't change people's minds. Proof does. And now you've seen it for yourself." Outside the glass window, the younger officers waited for answers that would never fully come. They wanted to know who she was, what the mark truly meant, and why the general had defended her. But some truths weren't meant to be written down in reports. Some truths lived only in the minds of those who carried them. The general stood, his decision clear. "You're not a prisoner anymore. But if we walk out of this room, we both carry the same burden." She nodded. Then we walked together. It wasn't a partnership of trust. Not yet. But it was a recognition that their paths were tied, and neither could face what was coming alone. As dawn's first light filtered through the station windows, the night's chaos faded into silence. The officers returned to their duties, pretending nothing unusual had happened, though every one of them knew it had. The suits would return, and the fight would stretch beyond these walls. But for now, there was a fragile peace. The story ended not with victory or defeat, but with a choice, a decision to stand for truth, even when it meant standing against the very system meant to protect it. And in that choice, both she and the general found the beginning of something larger than themselves, a reminder that courage often hides in silence until the world is finally ready to hear it.